Hello, everybody. We will start just in 1 minute. We'll wait everybody to attend. Just a reminder that this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to the Era for Health YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be seen, just please close your microphone and your camera, of course. I think we can start. 1 moment. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Shlomit Kenigsberg, and I'm the scientific officer at Era for Health. And Era for Health is a partnership to foster a European research area for health research, and this is our fourth webinar. And the subject would be generative AI in healthcare, advancing innovation while ensuring equity and responsibility. I would like to remind you again that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to Era for Health YouTube channel. You will also receive a link for the recording. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will have like 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. We will also have a poll during the session, the webinar, and we hope we just started with the poll application, so we hope it will work well. So please bear with us. Let me introduce our speaker today, Professor Michal Rosen-Zvi. She's the director of the Accelerated Healthcare Life Sciences Discovery at the IBM Research and a professor at the Hebrew University at the Faculty of Medicine. She's also heading the AI for Accelerated Healthcare and Life Sciences Discovery Department at the IBM Research in Haifa. Michal holds a PhD in computational physics and completed her postdoctoral studies at Berkeley, Irvine in the United States. And she's also a professor at the Hebrew University in the area of machine learning. Michal is also the co-director of 5 advanced schools in computer science and engineering at the Israeli Institute of Advanced Studies, and she's a member of the iScience editorial advisory board of several journals. So, Michal, thank you very much for joining us, and you have the stage.
Thanks a lot for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak here and to share views on what can be done in order to understand equity issues and responsibility, and some disclosures. I'm just flashing them here. I'm not going to read them. And I would like to start with actually a poll, because as you would see, the talk is going to be about generative AI in healthcare, advancing innovation while ensuring equity and responsibility. And the slides will highlight exactly where I am in the talk, because I'm going to focus on each and every concept and share a view on that and how they work together. So my first poll, if you can launch it, let's see that it works. Bear with us, as Shlomit said. It might not work. It might work. We'll try.
Okay.
Oh yes,
I think
works.
It's working.
It'd be wonderful if every participant take 1 minute just to share with us. It's anonymous, so we will not know who answered what. We just want to get some understanding when talking about generative AI, how much to focus on explanation on this concept and examples from this concept. So if you can answer this question, and I don't know, Shlomit, if you see how many answered already.
Look at the results. Not
so
yet.
Maybe no.
So I can read. Yeah. I think it will show up on the screen once it's done. I have
When you
4
say done,
responses.
then we will see the results? Okay.
I guess so, yes. We already have 14 responses. 30 responses, so I'll give it another, let's say 30 seconds until everybody will show. 58 responses, we'll give it a little bit.
Thank you very much for
time.
participating. It just helps us to make this discussion more two ways. It's hard to make it two ways when we have close to 300 people, but at least we can get some feedback at this stage and then in the questions. Someone wrote in the chat that they cannot hear, but if you can check, Shlomit, what's the case there. But let's close the poll so that we can start. I'm very curious to hear how the answers are distributed.
I think we can see the results only at the end, meaning when we finish the poll. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you that 58 people said I have some familiarity with it.
Perfect.
58% of the people.
Okay,
and
thank
the
you very
second
much.
one is I know it well, like 30% is I know
okay,
it
that's
well.
good to know. So since we have a very heterogeneous audience today, I will do some basic things and some advanced and sharing the latest and greatest from the community. I'll start by just a very brief bird view on how AI was evolved, artificial intelligence was evolved in the 80s with hard-crafted symbolic representations where people were talking about data in the sense of looking one by one and deciphering the connections. And then between the 80s till more or less 2010, the vast majority of AI work that back then was mainly called machine learning, the vast majority of the work was on prediction. There was also clustering and self-supervised learning, but that was not the vast majority of the work. And the size of the data was hundreds and thousands of examples to learn from and then to test on held out data. That was the key paradigm. And when I think of me coming back from UC Berkeley for my postdoctoral studies in machine learning and working with my team at IBM Research, it was sufficient to run algorithms on my own laptop. And there were many different methods to develop the technology. So there were support vector machines and random forest and decision trees and many different and logistic regression, many different methods. Some of them are very old. Some of them were expanded during this era of machine learning to have different regulators and different methods. And then around 2010, with the big push that came from benchmarks that different teams used in order to compare results, it became apparent that deep learning, which is a certain method of how to apply and develop AI, becomes the most advanced and the most successful technology. And when that became the most successful technology, the community of researchers and industry, vast majority of them moved into learning specific tasks using this type of deep learning. And then only in the past 8 years, the world has shifted into generative AI, which is the topic of what I would like to discuss today. And generative AI is these technologies, like in language, typically generative AI refers to technologies like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, all of these large language models that are being applied to huge amount of text, first learning from billions of pieces of text and then applied later in order to generate new text. That's why it's called generative AI. But often it also used in order to answer different tasks and to support different questions. And language is not the only area in which generative AI is being applied. It's being used in speech to text, in text to speech, in all of these applications when we talk and the technology write what we talk. Some of these technologies, at least the newer ones, are leveraging the fact that they completely understand how language looks like, because there is a pre-trained model that first learns from this huge amount of text and many different examples of how people are talking of speech, and then the task which is often called fine-tuned task, which is the specific task of specific set of questions, is being fine-tuned on this very basic foundation model. That's why often generative AI technologies are benefiting from technologies called foundation models that have this approach of first learning huge amount of data, the foundation of the data, and then proposing answers for specific questions. In the context of healthcare, generative AI and the technology I would talk about today would be in the context of learning from biological data, from molecules, small molecules that are drugs, from proteins, and also, of course, from medical images and language that and corpora that talks about the medical domain. And there's a typical way how generative AI is being applied and tested. And I just wanted to put one quick picture in this context that says when you apply an artificial intelligence algorithm, typically there are questions of what the data is composed of. These are called features, like the words might be, each word in a large corpora might be treated as a feature. And you might want to augment the data with examples that if you have insufficient number of examples. So for instance, when people are learning from medical images and and the algorithm aims at understanding how breast cancer images look like, I'm talking about, let's say, MRI and the ultrasound or mammography images. And at times, the cases that matter the most, like cancer cases, are the ones that are more rare comparing to screening test of mammography for breast cancer, where data that is available is huge amount of data of normal women that does not have any tumor. And therefore, when data is being learned in order to generate technology like generative AI, often data is augmented where examples and picture of women with breast cancer are being co-created or generated again with variations in order to learn about different ways cancer looks like, given that this is data that doesn't appear enough. So that's before the algorithm is being applied. And then the AI or the foundation model algorithm is being applied, and the core of this talk is about how this data can be verified to be unbiased, or how the technology can be developed in a way that ensures equity and responsibility. So before moving to talk about the application and the context of how these foundation models are being developed, I want to emphasize the reason why foundation models became such a huge success and OpenAI company created ChatGPT, and Google created Gemini, and IBM has Granite, and all of these large companies and different new organizations created technologies that are based on large language models. And similarly, the same is now being done in medical images, in speech, and the many other domains. And the reason is efficiency. And it might sound counterintuitive if you heard about the vast investment that requires the development of large language models or foundation models, generative AI technologies. And the reason is that in the past, when a company wanted a technology that enables detecting problems in hardware, they would have learned from the service team who interacted with people who raised problems. And then after training on this language and giving all kinds of examples of how to answer certain questions, they would have had one model. That's what you see at left, where for each specific question, there would have been a model. If you talk about imaging and you want to detect a cancer lesion in a breast mammography image, then you would design a study that first collects a lot of medical images of breast and has some input whether there was cancer or not, or there was not cancer in the image. And then for this very specific question, you can create an answer. So for each specific question, the investment is not as high as you do for first creating a foundation model. But for each specific question, you need to create a different model. And in the case of foundation models, generative AI technologies, this upfront investment that first you learn from huge amount of data that tells you how text looks like or how medical images look like, and then you can answer many different questions, it means a lot of saving and high efficiency in the market. And that's why the whole market, and the same for the biomedical domain, is shifting into this world of creating large foundation models, whether pre-trained on huge amount of text or pre-trained on other data sources that we will talk about, and then using these huge foundation models as the base to interact and ask and apply for many different things. And I would like to focus on foundation models, on the generative AI technologies in the biomedical domain, and talk about ensuring equity and responsibility. So with that, I'm moving to show you that if you look at different types of data, language models, foundation models that pre-train on language models, a key element of the learning is using self-supervised or masking. Masking meaning that the large language models you're familiar with, whether it, again, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Granite, all of these different models, Llama of Meta, whatever model you typically use, the first step that was done by the developers of the models was to take huge amount of text and to hide some of the words in this text, to mask them, and to design the algorithm in such a way that the parameters that learn in the model are capturing and learning the missing words. And that's the way to prepare a foundation model that learns a huge amount of data to capture correctly how text is being generated and what is the right rhythm or way to generate text. Obviously, and now we start thinking about biases and equity and responsibility. Obviously, when you pre-train on use this huge amount of data and learning from text, what the model knows is what the text, the model knows only what the text that was shown to it captured. So if the text included biases, the model wouldn't capture these biases. If the text was talking in a certain way, the model will learn its language. And that is why in the world of open models, there's a huge investment and wish in understanding the sources of the data of the models, what text was used. And in many of these models that I referred to beforehand, what data was used to pre-train the foundation model is not transparent, is not shared. And that's an element, a key element that we need to be aware of. And what I show here in this slide is that the concept of taking huge amount of text and masking it, and in this way teaching the foundation model how text looks like, repeats itself by the community when you want to learn from DNA and you have the sequence of the DNA sequence, and there are these letters, base pairs of the DNA that can be masked in order to learn from them. And similarly, when there's RNA expression data, where it's the profile of a cell of our body, and this profile of cells tells you for each of the genes that code proteins, so for each of these proteins that are being coded, how many copies you have from the messenger RNA, from this part of our body that is in control of creating these proteins. And this way to profile a cell tells you a lot about what the cell is doing and can be used in order to identify biomarkers for specific conditions, for risk prediction, and for identifying what activity is associated with a certain disease and learn about potential target for a drug. So what protein to target in order to create a drug to address the disease. And this RNA expression profile of the cell also comes as a list of genes and a list of copies of how many times each gene is being showed. And the approach of foundation models and masking that teaches you and helps the model learn how profiles of cells look like can be applied here too, and masking is applied here too. So that's about generative AI. I'm now going to move to talk about healthcare, and again, I'll ask Shlomit to pull a poll if that's a possibility. And in this poll is to get a sense, and we will share with everybody the results at the end, and Shlomit will tell us as soon as we stop the poll. So when you please put a poll in, just to get a sense from the people who are with us on this call, what role do you have in the healthcare community? So from what perspective are you looking at potential equity and responsibility? I don't yet see the poll, Shlomit. I don't know if it's up or not.
I'm not sure. I put it on, but I think
someone else says it's not up. So if I don't see and another attendee, probably nobody sees.
Okay, let me see again. I think it's still alive, but we cannot see that. Let me.
Maybe we should just click on the polls ourselves.
Yeah.
No, I don't see it.
Okay, so let me.
Okay, let's continue because I don't want to wait. It would have been nice, but thanks for the attendee explaining that the previous poll had 5 pages and people could have answered all of them.
Okay, so probably people already answered all of them. So I will read from the results.
Yes.
The second question was, what is your role in the healthcare ecosystem? 36% of the people said I'm a researcher. Another 36% said I'm part of the ecosystem, but none of the above, which means I don't work for the pharmaceutical industry. I work as a care provider institution, and I'm not part of this ecosystem. So
thank you very much. Okay, and thanks to everybody who answered, and thanks for the comments in the chat. And we see now that all the poll was answered by whoever wanted to answer. And if you didn't answer all the questions, you still have a chance. If it's open at your end, you can continue answer because there will be more questions as we move along. So, okay, so we talk with researchers. I would be very quick here. Just a reminder for all the researchers and non-researchers, whoever is working on this work. I'm just reminding you that many of the conditions we suffer from are very complex and have different elements that play a role in them. What I share here is a reference to a paper we published a few years ago that reviewed the many different ways by which tumor heterogeneity can be studied and understood. And just thinking about the data modalities, what data to look at, it varies from the DNA mutations to the profile of the cell, of how many times the transcriptomic data, of how many times certain proteins are being replicated to, and this is within a single body of a person, and you can see different cells behavior within the tumor community of cells. And therefore, in these days, in the past decade, there was a huge investment and advancing the field through creating profiling at the level of a single cell. So single cell RNA sequencing data is something that the community has started to look at and learn from, and there are foundation models at that level as well. And obviously, as time evolved, different conditions, cancer in this example, also changed their behavior. And therefore, you want to look not only about the cells and how they behave, they want to look at the full organism and the phenotypic and the medical images that capture the change of the tumor. And at times, same cancer looks different, same cancer by name looks different when you look person by person. And some of the cancers, as you know, are originated from viruses like HPV virus for cervical cancer. And the same virus might mutate and change from woman to woman. So it might look very different. So the heterogeneity is huge. And therefore, similar to the language that it took billions of pieces of text in order to create strong foundation models that can generate very high quality results. here, in order to learn about biomedical, there is a need, given this high heterogeneity, to learn from huge amount of data sources. And that is why I want to share with you the view of where the world is moving, how innovation is being advanced in the biomedical domain. And this view has generative AI in its funnel of discoveries that are being used by researchers, physicians, and patients. And what you can see here is that when this huge amount of data, epigenomic, transcriptomic, all of this data, serves the researchers, the physicians, and the patients who want to improve their status and to interact and learn about it, serve in these many different research questions and discoveries to happen. The new generation of this type of research goes through the funnel of generative AI foundation model technologies. And there are many different foundation models that were created based on these unimodalities, specific modalities separately, as well as combination of modalities, so different data at the same time. And these generative AI technologies are being used today to answer all kinds of questions, like whether a small molecule, a candidate drug, will bind to a protein, where the hope and intent is that if the small molecule bind to a specific protein that is part of the process of the disease, and the molecule will stop the activity of the protein, the course of the disease will change, and potentially there will be a full cure or improvement of symptoms or stop of the deterioration of the condition. Similarly, if there's multi-omic data that profiles the cells of the patients and the mutations, variations in the DNA, often, as we know today, the treatment offered to patients in cancer and in other complex conditions depends on this knowledge of what is the cell profile, what is the mutations that you see. So researchers, physicians, and patients are benefiting from this type of basic research that is about, it's happening today. So I see many of the people here probably have their own pet example, but I see a lot of cases where these foundation models become the basis in order to create new drugs, in order to advise on treatment, in order to assess deterioration of disease. To give you two pet examples of mine, so everyone can think of their own, because in a minute we are going to ask whether there are biases and inequities and how we can do it in a responsible way. But just to give you a concrete example in mind, I saw a foundation model that learned from patients' gait, how they move around, and learned from sequence of EKG from the brain in order to understand their status of Parkinson's disease and assess whether they are in a deterioration, whether there needs an intervention. There are not many drugs, not many drugs that can be offered to Parkinson's disease patient, but part of the challenge is also to assess their status. And this is an example where foundation model that was learned on these signals that are being read from the patient was used in order to offer how to go forward in terms of understanding the disease status and intervention. A very different example is antibody design, where foundation model that learned from information about proteins was used in order to generate a new, like you generate a new picture, you generate a new antibody that would fit the properties you want to have, that would connect to the antigen, that would initiate activity of the immune system. One last example, just to have a broad scope, is an example of trying to understand what's unique to a subset of patients. So if there are rare conditions or if there are common conditions, but there are many different etiologies of disease. So the development of the disease looks very different for different patients. Let's say it's IBD. It's a bowel disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and the challenge is to understand the course of the disease and what separate out certain patients from others, and looking at the profile of the cells can help understand that. And then the transcriptomic data and foundation model for transcriptomic data, I saw an example, it was used in order to analyze the differences between patients with IBD in order to try and identify those who would benefit from existing drugs and those who require new drugs. So all of these are examples of foundation models that first learn about from this huge data, and then they are serving the community that is using them. And the vision is, it's not happening today, but the vision is that large language models like ChatGPT or any other large language model would be a way to interact with the vast knowledge that the model, the foundation model that learned from DNA or RNA or any other or medical images have created. And that's the direction the community and the technology companies are moving, which is agentic workflow, where you create agents from specific technologies and they can interact and being managed through large language models. So with that, I'm finishing this part and want to move and talk about ensuring equity and responsibility. And I think I have a question related to that. What was the question number 3? We don't hear you, Shlomit.
So question number 3 is, how familiar are you with the concept of benchmark for AI technologies? 32 people said not at all familiar. Another 34%, I have a vague understanding. 26%, I'm familiar with a new concept, and 9%, I work in this field.
Okay, so I see someone wants to ask a question, and we are going to keep 15 minutes at the end for questions, so I don't want to interrupt to make sure that I finished my story. But if there's questions, you can put in the chat, and Shlomit will track that and make sure that we keep them. Okay, so thank you very much for the feedback about benchmarks. That's exactly what I needed to know for this last part of the talk. And in this last part of the talk, I'm using some references and figures from papers that were published in the last couple of years, the last few years. And these papers will show what is known about data that community is using from biomedical domain. So what you see here is information about GWAS, the genome-wide association studies that are being used by foundation models. And there are large collections of data that teams are developing their technology based on this data. And what you can see here, that if you count the number of individuals who contributed to the data and look at where they come from which country, from which region, you can see that vast majority of the people whose data was shared with the community for training foundation models comes from Europe, which of course, by definition, creates a bias because Europe is not the vast majority of the world, and it should be transparent. And here we talk about transparency, the team is showing that, but it should be transparent because if people are using the funnel-like activity that I shared, first there's huge data, then there's a foundation model that learns from that, and then the foundation model answers all kinds of questions. Whoever is using these foundation models needs to know what data was used to originally create the knowledge of the foundation model. And if the usage of the model is for European patients, that's perfect. But if the aim is to answer questions associated with diseases that characterize other communities that are not coming from Europe, then there's a need to be aware of the limitation of the model. And another example, and then I will move to benchmarks that seems to require some more talking, and so I will focus on the benchmarks in a minute. But another example is the example of transcriptomic data. CellXGene is the resource of data that the community is using that was created in 2021, but you can see that in 2021 it contained an order of 1 million or 2 million cells that people were used in order to pre-train their models. But as time evolved, towards the end of 2025, the data in CellXGene that vast majority of the community who develop models from transcriptomic data uses this data. Now it contains 100 million cells. And what's nice about SelectGene is that this data that is used for pre-training is labeled with information of what is the data source. Is it human or non-human? What's disease the person suffer from? Which cell type it is? Sex, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So also on this data, and there are many foundation models the community is using that is pre-trained on this transcriptomic data. And you can see here the references from a few months ago. Also in this data, when you think about the origin of the data, you can see that a vast amount of data around, so vast amount of data comes from Europe. So if you look at panel E, you can look at the paper and find the full story of how the data is distributed. But if you look specifically about the origin of the cells that are being contributed for this 100 million huge data set, 100 million cells, you can see that vast amount of the cells are from unknown origin, which is not good if you want to understand the ethnicity distribution of the data. And the second largest number of contributors of data are from Europe. And far below, it's Korean, Japanese, African American, Singapore, Chinese, Asian, and so on. So again, transparency is very, very important if you want to first create a model that train on this huge amount of data, and then to use it for the next set of questions that can be very diverse, as we discussed before. So one way to ensure equity and responsibility would be to create communities that are responsible for this work. That it's not a journey for one company or for one research organization. And I would like to share with you an organization. There are a few of them. I will share the one that IBM, Meta, and many other organizations are part of. This is called the AI Alliance, that brings together a critical mass of compute data tools and talent to accelerate and advocate for open innovation in AI. And we have created, colleagues of mine and we created a project called AI for Drug Discovery that looks specifically on that, how foundation models are being used in order to learn from this huge amount of data sets, and what can be done in order to make it more transparent and inclusive and so on. Now, I don't want to go to the very simple approach that says, make sure you get data from more resources. Of course, with sufficient funds, the efforts like that can be more inclusive. But the way these efforts are being driven, they are being driven by specific organizations who have specific questions in mind, the research questions, and for that reason, they collect the data and then they make the data available for everyone. And clearly, we are welcoming the community who are developing these foundation models. We are welcoming whoever wants to contribute data. So beyond the obvious of making some shifts of investments of what data to be created, with the given information of data is available, what can be done to ensure equity and responsibility? The AI Alliance itself is a very large organization. You can see here, and thanks Shlomit for sharing the link, so you can look at it yourself if you want to find more, and it's open, so everybody can join it. And there's a whole discussion of what does it mean to have open software, open technology. And one of the aspects of open technology is to enable testing of the technology. So there are different shades or levels of openness. One aspect of openness is to enable testing of your model. So and that's all the models that are currently being used by the community, they have been tested by benchmarks. And benchmarks is something yet again being created by the community, where there are a specific set of questions that will attest to the quality of the technology and will enable comparison between technologies. I'm going to give you some examples, but there's a large amount of such benchmarks. So I'm going to give you some examples of how benchmarks look like. There's the massive multitask language understanding benchmark that was created with 57 different areas like elementary mathematics, US history, computer science, law, medical questions. And these questions were used, and these are like, I don't recall the exact number, we'll see it in a minute, but is in the tens of thousands of questions that the community created. Some of them were held out in order to test the model. Some of them were used in order to train the model. So if the models wants to improve on the way they answer the questions, they can use some training and to see what the performance of the models. And what you see here is something that I captured this morning from the website of Stanford called Helm. And it shows a leaderboard. It shows who is the winning in terms of performance. The higher the better. You can see the accuracy in this number of Claude reaching 0.873 and DeepSeek reaching 0.872. I'm not sure the differences in this level matter much, but you can see that within this leaderboard, the winning technologies, some of them are very open, like DeepSeek, that the technology, the software technology can be downloaded and used by whoever wants it. And there's a paper explaining the innovation. The only part that is not completely open is about the data that they use to learn from. And as we just discussed, this is not a minute detail. This is very important to know what you learned from, because that influences many of the results. However, when you have a benchmark, so you can say, okay, I'm not sure what you learned from, but let's see how good you are and what you capture and what you were able to do. And if the benchmark itself is open, you can know what the benchmark is doing. So what you can see here is that Llama and DeepSeek, which are open code as opposed to ChatGPT and Claude and others, you can see on x-axis here from April 22 to July 2024, the big steps that the open technology made. Now they are among the cloud of winners, like I showed you from this morning, from previous slide, as opposed to same set of questions, multimodal language understanding, MMLU test, where the accuracy of all models 3 years ago was around 42%, not 80 plus, 87, 86 that we saw from today. And at the beginning, only the closed models, FLAN and GPT, were outperforming the community. But now we can see a cloud of results that I also showed you in the previous slide. I'm going to skip this one just to talk about another test that was made available not so long ago. So this new test called the Humanity Last Exam, they ask questions that are at the level of university professors. So they said, as opposed to previous tests, like we just talked about MMLU, but there are other benchmarks. So as opposed to all of these pink benchmarks where models are performing very well and improved significantly, they put an aim to ask questions that are much more complex. And in this way to benchmark, so they created 2,500 questions. In this way to benchmark for real, I give you one example of breast cancer, and I didn't copy the full question. You can all find it online. But this benchmark you can see here, it's a question that asks for a woman who had breast cancer and then she had a metastasis, and we have all kinds of information of her HER2 status and all of these tests that are being taken in order to characterize what is the right answer. And then for this multiple choice question, there are 5 different options, and the models are being asked to select the right answer. So as I shared before, the data matters a lot it might have biases. It influences the foundation models, it influences everything that comes later. Benchmarks are a way to ensure equity and responsibility, to make sure that things are open and you can learn from them. But if you look at this question, it immediately becomes clear to whoever is doing research on breast cancer that this question might fit a subpopulation, because a cohort study found notable disparities in incidence and proportion of different molecular subtypes based on ethnicity. So this question might tell you that the answer of the model is very good for a very specific scenario, but not for another one. And if we take a step back, I try to read, these are 2,500 questions, but I looked only on the medical domain, which is few hundreds. I tried to look at all of them. I saw a lot of complex questions. I didn't see anything about tuberculosis, which is a huge problem in certain parts of the world. So even when you have a benchmark that in order to understand how good the model is, it's not good enough, of course. You would have to look at the benchmarks and understand what exactly they test in order to have responsible answer with the models. Unfortunately, given the limitation of time, I'm going to skip this part. You can look at the paper. It's about how you make the models more explainable. There are many different methods. I'm not going to talk about that. I just want to finish with the message. And the message of this talk is that ensuring equity and responsibility in the development of foundation models for biomedical requires collaboration across the entire ecosystem. We talked about AI Alliance, with the other activities, but the whole ecosystem needs to share the effort of developers, clinicians, patients, industry, regulators, and beyond. And the recommendation we make, and this is a paper that we are about to submit, a team that is partially supported by the EU Marie Curie project called AHEAD that you can see down below. What we recommend is to use the PROB framework: provenance, openness, benchmarking, and evaluation transparency. And together we can build models that are not only powerful, but also trustworthy, responsible, and aligned with real-world impact. Thank you very much. Time for questions. And maybe you can show I can stop sharing and you can show the poll if there's a way to show it now that we are done.
Yes, I will try that. I just want to say that the last question was, how concerned are you about the current state of generative AI technologies from a bioethical perspective? And 40% people said, I am worried and I'm still am about that. So for sure, there's a lot of worries around it. I think we are just in the beginning of, or maybe in the middle of a huge change in human society. So time will show up what the AI has given us. And I think we can go back to, if anyone has any question, please post it in the Q&A section. But we will also read from the chat.
Okay, so I see a lot of questions. A question about the explainable AI, how do we overcome the black box and explainable AI? It's a question that I love because I prepared a slide on that, but I will be very, very short, just saying that we did an analysis, a group from European researchers a couple of years ago, to understand what the community is saying about biomedical explainable AI. And we saw that the world is divided into three areas. The best way to understand the model is if you can infer causal relations from the model. So if we can, most of the time it's impossible, but when it is possible to infer that a certain intervention caused a result, then it means that we understand why we are able to why we are able to predict something, because we know the dependency on cause and outcome. This is most often impossible, but in many other cases, when there is a need to understand what impact a result, there are methods that are looking at local explanation, like hide some pixel in an image if you want to understand how an algorithm decided that there's a cancer in the image. The most common way is to say, okay, let's hide all kinds of combinations of pixels. Whenever the answer changes, the algorithm found cancer, says it's cancerous, there is cancer in the image, the mammography image, and then we start to hide some pixels. Whenever we find the pixels that if we hide them, then the model will say, oh, there's no cancer, then these are the pixels where the explanation comes from. And that's called a local explanation, because you identify a specific set of features that explain that. And sharp analysis that is very commonly used is one of the methods that people are applying in order to understand models. So trying to figuring out what specific input impacted the result is often the best way to open the black box, and it's a post-analysis. And you can see in the paper more discussion on that.
I want to read the first question that was during the presentation. My question is regarding the Parkinson pattern example. Isn't it about the model learning and identifying patterns to later predict for new examples of Parkinson's state at early stage? How is it generative?
Generative AI. It's a very good question, and thank you for the question, because I didn't explain what was done in this particular example. So first, there was a foundation model that learns about how people are walking. So it was using a lot of video images of people moving, not people with Parkinson, nothing to do with Parkinson. That's the foundation model. So first, the model was trained on how movements look like. And then a fine-tuned model was taking this pre-trained model on this huge amount of images and fine-tuned of the few cases of Parkinson that were labeled in the data, that it was known not only what was the movement, but what happened later to them. And for this very specific fine-tuned task, the model was able to assess the severity of the disease. So that's the regular concept of first you learn something about how people move, that's the foundation model, and then you learn how it connects to specific task, and that's why it's called generative AI, because with this basic model that learns how people move, you can also create a movie of a person moving, although nobody moves there at all. You just created that from what you learned in the model, so you could generate movement of a person as well. And thanks for the question.
Okay, there's another question. I'm not sure what you mean by equity in this context. Please comment on that.
Okay. So first, let me acknowledge that this is a very complex concept. I'm not an expert in equity, and I will give my own interpretation in this context of the discussion today, not in general what equity should mean. But in the context of today, the equity means providing the same opportunity to all the different subpopulations, to opportunity of benefiting from technology. And as I said, given the limitation that there are funds that are allocated for specific studies, and these studies might happen more in Europe, so the data would be more in Europe. We still want everybody to have the opportunity to benefit from the models, and the claim is that with the right benchmarking and transparency of what data was used, you can make the most possible from the models. Otherwise, they would include biases that you are not aware of, and when you are using them, they might impact the results, and that would be will harm some subpopulations. So equity is equity with the opportunity of benefiting from the models. By most can happen given the situation. I hope that answers.
Okay, the next question is, have you heard of the new initiative from CSI? Maybe it's the Czech Republic, I'm not sure. The new AI model, CZI, new AI model, transcriptomer. And what do you think about it?
Okay, so there's Chan Zuckerberg, Selex gene that I refer to is the full name, and we saw that in the paper that I refer to, which is where I took the data from, is the CZI Cell Science Program. And I heard about that, of course, and the slide that I showed, maybe I can reshare, but the slide that I showed that was talking about how the data looks like is taken from there. So I highly appreciate the openness of the data. You can see that the science program from it's a Chan Zuckerberg was shared with the community with transparent information whenever possible with respect to what the data sources are. So this is very welcoming approach that the community is benefiting from that, and I believe a lot of innovation can happen thanks to this activity. Back to you,
Okay.
Shamit. Yeah.
Another question. My studies in medicine use vignette and not real-world time data. What are traditional research methods like RCT, platform trials, and etc. are not used?
I'm not sure I understood the question. So can you repeat? It's about, oh, now I see it. Most studies in the medicine use vignette and not real-world time data. Why are traditional research methods like randomized clinical trials, platform trials, etc., not used? Okay. These methods might enable replacement of some of the activities of randomized clinical trial, but I wouldn't say they are not used. They are used here in different ways. So let me go back to the main. I hope I understood the question. I'm not sure, but let me just go back to the main picture of what is being done with the foundation models. When I talk about this massive data that is being used in order to create foundation models, some of this data come from clinical trials. For instance, medical imaging, there's a huge open clinical trial that phase 4 that was used for breast cancer, and my team and other participated in analyzing that, and that was made available for the community to develop. So there are a lot of aspects taken from the traditional methods of randomized clinical trials that are being used as data source. That's one way. The other aspect where clinical trial is being used is I talked about validation with benchmarks. And this is a very, very good comment. Thanks for the comment. Now I understand where I should have emphasized the use of randomized clinical trials. Remember that when you do benchmarks for text, there are questions and there are answers, and the only best judge is us human, because language is something we invented. But when we do benchmark or test for foundation models that learn from biology and chemistry and try to understand disease, the best way to test it is to put it to a trial, to have a randomized clinical trial, so or to run experiments. So if we talk about foundation models that learn for designing new antibodies, we can do experiment that test if this antibody indeed binds to the antigen and does what we expect it to do. So this is live test that is not relevant for the text world, but this live test is relevant for this world of biomedical. And then if the hypothesis is that this new antibody can serve as a new therapeutic, the only way to test it is randomized clinical trial, the traditional way. There's no way to jump ahead and to just say, oh, the foundation models was certain and the experiment supported, so we know now that everything would work perfectly well. The world is much more noisy and complex than that. So the traditional methods of clinical trial are being used all over the place. I just didn't highlight them in different places. And these days, there are multiple molecules being tested in clinical trials, molecules that were created by generative AI technologies, at least according to publications.
Okay, and the next question is, should we have an open source and transparent register for trained large learning models, specifically for healthcare, with standardized reporting of its element and tests? Does it exist already? Is it compatible with the business that try to develop and sell their models?
So that's a very good point. There's Hugging Face. I believe one of the references I shared were from Hugging Face. Hugging Face is the place to share AI models. So I can show here. Maybe I'll just put the link. But Hugging Face is the place where models are being shared, and it's indeed very, very important. And the whole community is always using Hugging Face. And my team, when we create model, we share the model at Hugging Face. There's a repository for code and repository for model. GitHub is a very famous, widely used repository for model, and Hugging Face is the place for code. And it is very important for the community. And the question of how it competes or doesn't compete with the business world, right? Because in the business world, people are using models and sell them. That's an open question. The community is working these days on, and you saw some of the activities from AI Alliance as an example, on creating models that would be open and shared, and then the platform that make it smooth, quick, and easy is the one that being commercially offered often by companies. And agentic workflow is, again, taking some of the models that are open, but creating agents out of them that smoothly interact in a way that is very efficient in the commercial context, is the way some teams are making business out of it. And what I shared here is a GitHub repository that my team has created, again, sharing code, and for specific models, we put in Hugging Face, which is the place to put models.
Okay, so in sake of time, we need to finish over here. Thank you very much for this excellent talk. I'm putting again in the chat about the AI Alliance, and I'm also sharing our newsletter, the AI for Health newsletter, because we are planning a course on AI in healthcare. So if anybody wants to register and know more about AI in healthcare, can really register to our newsletter and have this information. Again, the recording will be sent to everybody, and some people also ask for your details and to know if they can work with you, etc. So please send me an email and I will deliver everything to Michal, and Michal will answer you in private. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.
And you can reach out through LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way to reach out if someone
The
wants.
best would be. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.